The smile that vanished. What would you do if the proof of your husband's affair wasn't in his phone, but sitting in a bank file with your name on it? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. I didn't find lipstick on a collar. I didn't find text messages lighting up at midnight. I found hotel receipts. 2 of them. Same hotel, same room number, 2 separate weeks. Folded small and shoved under the passenger seat of my husband's Lexus like they meant nothing. Daniel Lawson was 65 years old, a respected commercial construction contractor, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and donated to local fundraisers. We had been married for 34 years, and I was 62. Margaret Lawson, retired school counselor, the woman who helped other couples navigate betrayal and miscommunication and midlife reinvention. Funny, isn't it? I always thought if infidelity came for me, it would arrive loudly. A perfume scent, a late-night confession, something cinematic. Instead, it came printed in black ink on hotel stationery. 2 nights, not a business trip. I sat in the driver's seat staring at those receipts longer than I'd like to admit. The car still smelled faintly of his aftershave. The radio was tuned to his usual sports station. Everything felt painfully normal. That's the strangest part about betrayal. It lives inside normal. I didn't confront him. That surprises you, doesn't it? Most people imagine rage, plates thrown, accusations hurled across the kitchen. But at 62, you learn something important. Explosions don't protect you. Information does. Daniel had always handled the finances. It wasn't intentional control at first. He earned more when his construction company expanded in his 40s. He understood investments better. I trusted him. Joint accounts, shared retirement portfolio, home equity line of credit, everything intertwined. And lately, he'd been pushing one idea hard, refinancing the house. "Interest rates are favorable, Maggie," he'd said, tapping numbers into his phone. "We can free up capital, reinvest, make our money work." Make our money work. Except I'd noticed something else. Cash withdrawals, larger than usual, frequent. When I asked casually about one $1,800 withdrawal 3 months ago, he waved it off. "Equipment deposit," he'd said. "Vendor preferred cash." That made sense. Construction still had handshake deals. Cash was common. But now? Now those hotel receipts sat in my lap, and suddenly the withdrawals felt heavier. Have you ever had that moment when scattered details rearrange themselves into a pattern so obvious you feel foolish for missing it? I didn't cry, not that day. I folded the receipts carefully and slipped them into my purse instead of putting them back. Then I went inside and made dinner. Daniel came home an hour later smiling, carrying strawberries from the market like he always did on Thursdays. He kissed my cheek. "How was your day?" Normal. So painfully normal. And I realized something else in that moment. If he was hiding an affair, he was confident. Confident I wouldn't look deeper. Confident I wouldn't question finances. Confident that after 3 decades, I was predictable. But here's what he didn't know. The week before I found those receipts, I'd already been uneasy. Not because of another woman, because of paperwork. He'd brought me forms to sign late one evening, said they were part of restructuring his business liability. "Just routine," he'd assured me, sliding pages across the kitchen counter. I'd skimmed them. Legal language, dense paragraphs, references to equity positions. I didn't sign that night, and he didn't push, which was unlike him. That's when the first crack formed. The hotel receipts were just confirmation that something bigger was wrong. So instead of confronting him, I did something quieter. I called our bank. We'd been with the same regional bank for 22 years, long enough that the manager knew our anniversary date from idle conversation. His name was Ethan Reed, 48, meticulous, observant, the kind of man who noticed when clients shifted tone. I requested a private appointment, alone. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Lawson?" he'd asked gently. "I just need clarity," I replied. Clarity. That word became my anchor, because here's what people don't tell you about betrayal in your 60s. It's not just about heartbreak. It's about security. Retirement accounts don't recover from chaos easily. At 25, you can rebuild. At 62, you protect. So a week after finding the receipts, Daniel and I walked into that bank together for what he believed was a routine refinancing discussion. He wore his navy blazer, the one he saves for formal meetings. He smiled at Ethan like everything in his world was intact. Maybe he thought it was. We sat down across from Ethan's polished desk. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Sunlight filtered through half-closed blinds, cutting thin lines across Daniel's face. Ethan greeted us warmly, pleasantries first, market updates, interest rate chatter. Daniel leaned back confidently, one arm draped over the chair. Then something shifted. Ethan looked at his computer screen, paused, looked at Daniel, and held the gaze a second too long. It was subtle, almost invisible, but I saw it. Daniel saw it too, because his smile didn't fade immediately. It faltered, just slightly. Ethan folded his hands calmly and said, "Mr. Lawson, before we proceed, I need to ask you one clarification regarding recent account activity." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Daniel's posture stiffened. I didn't say a word, because I already knew something he didn't. But what Ethan said next would expose far more than a hotel room. And in that quiet office, with sunlight slicing across his face, my husband realized the secret he thought was buried was sitting in a bank file. And his smile disappeared. The receipts he thought I'd never see. Affairs don't start in hotel rooms. They start in small financial decisions no one thinks to question. Let me take you back to the day everything shifted. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary. I was vacuuming Daniel's Lexus because he had mentioned clients might ride with him later that week. 34 years of marriage teaches you habits. I've always kept things neat. The vacuum hose bumped against the passenger seat rail. Something crinkled. I reached down. 2 folded slips of paper. Hotel stationery. The kind printed on thick cream cardstock with the logo embossed at the top. A boutique hotel 40 minutes outside our city. The kind couples choose for weekend escapes, not business conferences. 2 separate dates, 1 week apart. Room 314. Paid in cash. And here's the detail that made my stomach turn. Both stays were midweek, Tuesday into Wednesday. Daniel's site inspection days. I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I studied. Total charge, $486 per night. Parking included. Breakfast for 2. Breakfast for 2. That tiny line item hit harder than the room charge, because breakfast means morning. Morning means intimacy. Morning means it wasn't rushed. It was comfortable. Do you see how the mind works? It fills in scenes without permission. I folded the receipts carefully and slid them into my cardigan pocket. Then I finished vacuuming. Why? because I needed the illusion of control. That afternoon, instead of confronting him, I did something far more dangerous. I logged into our online banking. Now here's what you need to understand. Daniel handled investments, but I had full access. I just rarely used it. Trust becomes routine over decades. Scrolling back 4 months, patterns emerged. Cash withdrawals, $2,000, then $3,500, then $1,800, then $4,200, all spaced roughly 2 to 3 weeks apart. Total, just over $18,000. That's not impulse spending, that's funding something. And cash withdrawals are deliberate. They leave less trail. No merchant name, no explanation. Except the bank still records them. Then I noticed wire transfers. 3 separate transfers labeled consulting. Recipient, El Moreno Enterprises. Amount, $7,500 total across 3 months. Consulting for what? Daniel's construction business had no consultant by that name. I knew the regular vendors, so I searched. Lila Moreno, age 39, public social media profile, marketing freelancer, divorced, based in the neighboring city, the same city as the hotel. Coincidence? Maybe, but coincidences stack until they collapse. Now here's the twist I didn't expect. 2 weeks before I found those receipts, Daniel had been unusually insistent about refinancing our home. He framed it as strategy. We can access equity, Maggie, reinvest, scale 1 more project before I retire. 1 more project? At 65? He'd also asked me to sign preliminary documents transferring partial collateral authority tied to the home equity line of credit. I hadn't signed. Something about the timing felt rushed. And now, staring at hotel charges and unexplained transfers, the refinance conversation felt less like ambition and more like liquidity. Liquidity for what? An affair is emotional, but $18,000 in cash? That's structural. So I made the appointment with the bank, alone. When I sat across from Ethan Reed, he didn't look surprised to see me. That detail still chills me. "Mrs. Lawson," he said calmly, "how can I help today?" I slid 1 receipt across the desk, not dramatically, just quietly. "I'd like clarity on recent withdrawals and transfers." He didn't ask about the hotel. He focused on the accounts, professional, careful. He pulled up statements, scrolled, paused, and then he did something subtle. He leaned back. "Mrs. Lawson," he said, lowering his voice slightly, "have you personally authorized any wire transfers to El Moreno Enterprises?" "No." That answer came easily. He nodded once. "And are you aware of a pending request to increase your home equity line under joint collateral?" That's when the second wave hit. Pending request. Not hypothetical discussion, not casual idea. A request, filed, by Daniel. My pulse remained steady. Years of counseling taught me emotional regulation. "What amount?" I asked. "An additional $120,000. $120,000. That's not hotel money. That's starting over money. That's investment in someone else's money. Or worse." "Has it been approved?" I asked. "Not yet," Ethan replied. "Final authorization requires both signatures." Both. And I hadn't signed. Which means Daniel planned to bring me into the bank soon, smile charmingly, and have me sign without scrutinizing. Confidence. That word again. Here's the irony. Daniel thought the affair was the secret, but the larger secret wasn't the hotel room. It was leverage, equity, marital assets being repositioned, Ethan continued carefully. There is also an unusual digital consent log attached to the preliminary request. Digital consent log. I don't recall authorizing anything digitally, I said. He studied the screen again. It appears your email was used to access the pre-approval portal. My email? Except Daniel set up most of our financial logins years ago. He knew my passwords. You see how the story shifts? This wasn't just betrayal. This was risk, legal risk, financial exposure, and suddenly the receipts felt almost small compared to that. I left the bank that day with more information than Daniel realized existed, and I made one decision. I would not confront him at home. I would wait, because if he believed I was unaware, he would proceed. And if he proceeded, he would expose himself. The following week, Daniel cheerfully reminded me of our routine refinancing meeting. He had no idea I had already been in that office. No idea Ethan had flagged the transfers. No idea the digital consent attempt had been noted. We walked into that bank together like any long-married couple planning retirement strategy. He squeezed my hand, smiled at Ethan, confident. But as Ethan opened the file and the screen reflected numbers only he and I fully understood, something in Daniel's posture tightened. Because secrets can survive in bedrooms, they don't survive in spreadsheets. And what happened next in that office would prove that the affair was only the beginning. But when Ethan asked his first carefully phrased question, Daniel still believed he could talk his way out of anything. He had no idea how prepared I was, and he definitely didn't expect the next layer that was about to surface. But what came next would pull the thread so tightly that the entire fabric of his plan would begin to unravel, and he wouldn't see it coming. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's paperwork. That's the thought running through my mind the moment Daniel and I stepped into the bank the following Tuesday. He was smiling, of course. That familiar, confident grin that had carried him through countless boardroom negotiations, city council meetings, even family disputes over trivial matters like whose turn it was to host Thanksgiving. He thought this meeting was routine. Refinancing. Sign here, initial there, maybe a few questions about interest rates. Nothing dramatic, nothing revealing. I let him think that. We entered Ethan Reed's office together. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting stripes across the polished oak desk. Daniel sat first, settling into the chair with ease, legs crossed, posture relaxed. I followed, keeping my face neutral, calm, controlled. He wouldn't recognize the predator behind the eyes today, the one who had already unearthed his receipts, followed the cash trail, and consulted an attorney. Ethan greeted us warmly. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. Let's go over some details for the refinance request." His voice was steady, professional, reassuring. And yet, there was a subtle shift in his tone, the slightest tightening around the eyes, the faint pause before he spoke. Daniel leaned back, a hand brushing his blazer. "Of course, let's do this." The first few minutes were perfunctory. Ethan explained the current interest rates, the benefits of consolidating accounts, the minor adjustments in the home equity line. Daniel nodded, adding comments here and there, demonstrating his usual charm and confidence. But I noticed the flicker, a subtle raising of Ethan's eyebrows, a tap of a pen against the desk. Then the conversation shifted. "I see there have been several large cash withdrawals over the past few months," Ethan said casually, almost conversationally. But Daniel stiffened. His smile faltered ever so slightly. "Routine expenses," Daniel replied. You know, construction business, cash for vendors, standard practice. Ethan leaned forward. I also see wire transfers to an L, Moreno Enterprises. Were you aware of those, Mr. Lawson? Daniel blinked. A pause. He turned to me, the first sign of unease. His confidence wavered, but he masked it with a half-smile. Ah, yes, he began. That's, business consulting. Nothing unusual. Ethan didn't push. Not yet. He simply looked at him, waited, observed. The silence stretched, and I watched as Daniel's carefully constructed facade began to crack. I asked nothing. I didn't need to. Ethan's presence, his subtle scrutiny, did all the work. Then Ethan said the words that changed everything. Mr. Lawson, are you aware that the request to increase your home equity line under joint collateral requires both signatures? Daniel froze. Not dramatically, but internally. His confident body language faltered. His hand, which had been casually draped across his lap, twitched slightly. I could see him processing the implications. He had planned this. He believed he had me cornered, my trust as predictable as it had been for decades. And yet, here, in front of a bank manager, a quiet professional who asked questions without accusation, he realized he had underestimated something far bigger than a hotel receipt. I remained calm, heart steady, voice neutral. Just a nod. Let him sweat. Ethan continued, layering facts carefully, like a sculptor revealing the form beneath the marble. There is also an unusual digital consent log attached to the preliminary request, Mr. Lawson. It appears the authorization came from Mrs. Lawson's email, though she denies initiating it. Could you clarify? Daniel's eyes darted toward me. Panic just beneath the surface. He stammered, attempted to deflect. I must have misremembered. Perhaps a misclick? Ethan's gaze never wavered. These logs are considered legal documentation, sir. Any unauthorized attempt to access or sign on behalf of another party could have significant consequences. The room felt suddenly tight. Every breath weighted. Daniel's confident exterior cracked like old plaster. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. I sat silently, letting him dig his own hole. Then came the twist. Ethan, with perfect neutrality, mentioned something neither Daniel nor I had anticipated. Mr. Lawson, the wire transfers to Miss Moreno are currently flagged for review. This review includes both the hotel payments and any linked accounts. Daniel's face drained of color. His jaw tightened. I felt the shift, the invisible hand of accountability tightening around him. The realization hit him slowly. The affair, the cash withdrawals, the hotel rooms. These weren't secrets anymore. Not because I confronted him, not because I called Ethan, but because someone meticulous and prepared had connected the dots before he even realized he was exposed. Daniel whispered my name, almost pleading. Maggie, we need to talk. I didn't respond. Calm was my weapon, silence my armor. Ethan's next question, simple and quietly devastating, landed like a hammer. Shall we review the legal implications of the unauthorized consent form, Mr. Lawson? His eyes widened. The carefully constructed life of lies and assumptions began unraveling. Daniel's charm, which had carried him through decades of negotiation and manipulation, was ineffective here. Logic, process, and meticulous observation were stronger than charm, stronger than fear, stronger than hotel rooms and cash withdrawals. I leaned back, watching. Daniel realized that the real leverage in our marriage wasn't me. It wasn't a confrontation in the bedroom. It wasn't even Ethan. It was information, preparation, and silence. And he realized finally that the hotel receipts were the smallest of his mistakes, because what came next would push him further than panic. It would push him to face the full extent of his misjudgment. That was the thought running through my mind as Ethan Reed leaned back slightly in his chair, hands folded calmly, letting Daniel stew in his own tension. I could see it in every small detail, the tightening of Daniel's jaw, the slight tremor in his fingers, the way his eyes flicked nervously toward me but refused to meet mine. He was beginning to understand that the game he thought he was playing had rules he didn't know, and an opponent who had already read the entire playbook. Ethan spoke again, his tone deliberate, professional. "Mr. Lawson, I need to ensure that all parties understand the legal responsibilities connected to this collateral and the recent transfers to Ms. Moreno. Unauthorized use of a spouse's digital signature can constitute fraud under current state law." Daniel's voice hitched slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, searching for words. I didn't mean, it wasn't, I was just trying to what?" I asked softly, for the first time in the meeting. My voice wasn't accusatory, just steady, calm, neutral. But Daniel flinched anyway. He realized I had been the one quietly orchestrating the revelation of all this information. Not Ethan, not some stranger, me. I had the receipts, the account statements, the flagged wire transfers, and now Ethan was confirming the legal reality. Daniel swallowed hard. I thought I could fix it before you noticed," he admitted, almost whispering. His eyes, once brimming with confidence, now darted around the room like a man lost at sea. I didn't react immediately. I let him feel the weight of his actions. Betrayal isn't just emotional, it's strategic. And now strategy had returned to me. I allowed silence to stretch, letting him realize that he had miscalculated the situation entirely. Ethan leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Lawson, since the consent form is digital and Mrs. Lawson denies authorizing it, there is the potential for legal exposure. Should we proceed to notify the proper authorities regarding this matter?" The room went still. Daniel's face went pale, color draining from his cheeks. His hands fidgeted in his lap, betraying the controlled composure he had maintained for years. The man who had handled contracts, budgets, clients, and employees with confidence was suddenly vulnerable in the simplest way: a question. I finally spoke, calm, quiet, decisive. "I think we're done here." Daniel froze. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Maggie, wait, you can't—" "Yes," I interrupted gently. "We're done. I've already taken steps to secure the accounts. I've consulted our attorney. Any further financial transactions without my knowledge will be considered unauthorized." I could see comprehension, fear, and regret flicker across his face in rapid succession. And then, shame. That was the most intense moment of all, the realization that a lifetime of assumed control had evaporated in a single hour, not because of my anger, not because of a scene, but because of preparation, quiet observation, and the right question asked at the right moment. Daniel slumped back in his chair, silence finally overtaking the tension in the room. Ethan closed the file on the desk. "I'll prepare the necessary documentation to formalize this review. Mrs. Lawson, all of your financial protections will remain intact." The irony was exquisite. Daniel had believed the hotel stays, the cash withdrawals, the clandestine weekend getaways were his secret weapons. He thought his affair was the ticking bomb in the marriage. But the true leverage, the one thing he had never anticipated was me. Silence, knowledge, calm, and the ability to let the right person ask the right question at the right moment. I stood slowly. Daniel's shoulders slumped as I walked toward the door. I didn't glance back, though I knew he would follow, apologetic and flustered, muttering excuses. When we exited into the sunlight, the day felt colder, sharper. Daniel stayed quiet for a long stretch. He was processing, I could see it. The man who once controlled the finances, the home, the narrative, was now recalibrating, forced to confront consequences he had never imagined. In the parking lot, he finally broke the silence. "Maggie, we need to talk," he said again, more earnestly than ever before. I didn't respond. I only reached into my bag, slipping the folded hotel receipts back into my purse. Small, quiet reminders. Not for confrontation, for context, for clarity, for power regained. Because here's what Daniel finally understood in that moment. The affair was never the secret. The hotel rooms, the cash, the escapades, they were just details, distractions, smoke and mirrors. The real secret, the one he hadn't accounted for, was preparation, foresight, and a woman who refused to be blindsided in the final decades of her life. And that is the most terrifying realization for someone who believes control is theirs. You never see the real threat until the question is asked, and by then, it's too late to reclaim what you've assumed you own. Daniel's smile was gone. Confidence evaporated. Words failed him. And as I drove home later that day, I realized something else entirely. Vengeance had nothing to do with yelling, nothing to do with betrayal in a hotel room. True power, the kind that lasts, is quiet, calculated, and delivered at the precise moment that ensures no one, not even the offender, can deny it. But the story didn't end there. There was still one final layer, one more revelation that would cement the understanding of everything that had happened and redefine the rest of our lives. Chapter 3 complete. Conclusion. He thought the affair was the secret. Daniel's breakdown didn't happen in dramatic fashion. No shouting, no crashing plates. It happened slowly, painfully, in the empty parking lot outside the bank. I watched him slump against the hood of the car, fingers running through his hair, face pale and strained. His breath came unevenly, like someone who had been holding in decades of secrets and suddenly had to let them out all at once. I didn't mean for it to get this far," he whispered, almost to himself. I was lonely. I didn't think—" I didn't interrupt. There was no need. The confessions poured out, halting, fragmented, full of guilt, fear, and remorse. He admitted everything: weekend stays, cash withdrawals, the relationship with Lila Moreno, the elaborate attempts to conceal transfers. He thought he could manage the narrative, think ahead, control my reaction. But here's the truth. He had severely underestimated me. I didn't react with anger, not immediately. My anger was silent, strategic, controlled. Because after 34 years of marriage, I understood one thing. Betrayal is as much about action as it is about consequence. And consequences are what protect the life you've built. Back inside the house that evening, I finally laid everything out. Not as a confrontation, but as a plan. I explained to Daniel that the bank meeting had been about more than his affair. It had been about securing our retirement, protecting our assets, and safeguarding the years we had worked so hard to build. The hotel receipts were just the tip of the iceberg. The real concern was his manipulation of joint finances. "I didn't set out to humiliate you," I said, my voice steady. "I set out to ensure neither of us suffers further because of choices made without transparency." He was silent, absorbing, truly understanding for the first time that this wasn't about romantic betrayal alone. It was about financial integrity, legal responsibility, and respect. And in that silence, I realized something important about aging, about power, about self-preservation. Betrayal at 62 is different. It's not just heartbreak. It's a matter of survival. I had consulted an attorney before even entering the bank. Assets were frozen, accounts flagged, documentation prepared. I had ensured that no further unauthorized transactions could occur. I didn't want to destroy Daniel. I wanted him to face reality. I wanted him to recognize that the game he thought he was controlling had rules he hadn't anticipated. And here's the irony. He had believed the affair, the hotel rooms, the cash withdrawals were his secret weapons. But the truth was, the real leverage had been mine all along. Knowledge, preparation, patience, and a single, well-timed question asked by the right person in the right place. Daniel's smile, once so full of confidence and certainty, was gone. It had evaporated in the face of a question he could not evade, a truth he could not deny. And yet, in his breakdown, there was a moment of clarity, a recognition of responsibility that no confrontation at home could have forced. Reflecting on that moment now, I realize something powerful. Revenge, when calculated and deliberate, doesn't need drama. It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need public humiliation. True power is quiet. It's methodical. It's delivered at the precise time that ensures accountability without spectacle. And in that, I found not only closure, but empowerment. I also learned a deeper truth about marriage, betrayal, and aging. Betrayal at 62 is a different beast. It's measured not just in heartbreak, but in years of planning, of strategy, of careful observation. And in those years, you learn the value of patience. You learn the value of silence. You learn that sometimes the quietest actions are the most devastating. As for Daniel, the consequences were real but measured. Legal protections secured the finances. We negotiated a separation with dignity. The affair and its financial entanglements were addressed with transparency and professionalism. And for the first time in decades, I felt truly in control, not of Daniel, but of my life, my assets, my dignity. So let me ask you directly, what would you have done in my place? Confronted him immediately? Left everything to chance? Or, like me, observed, prepared, and waited for the precise moment that ensured the truth could no longer be hidden? Because that is the key takeaway here. Sometimes, the loudest revenge is not screaming. It is preparation. It is knowledge. It is waiting for the exact moment when a single question, asked calmly and strategically, changes everything. Daniel learned that the affair was not the secret he thought it was. The hotel rooms, the cash, the transfers, they were details. The true secret, the one he had overlooked, was a woman who refused to be blindsided, who had prepared, and who allowed the truth to be revealed with precision, dignity, and quiet authority. And in that moment, I understood fully. Control isn't about hiding the truth, it's about ensuring the truth protects you. The final lesson? Never underestimate the power of patience, preparation, and the right question at the right time. Sometimes the best way to protect your life and your future is to wait, to observe, to let someone else ask the question that changes everything.